Right now, an Indonesian YouTuber is creating this high production value video content that basically rivals a mid-sized studio. And they are operating entirely alone using artificial intelligence.
Which is wild to think about.
It really is. But, at the exact same moment, a 40-year-old call center worker in the Philippines is manually correcting transcripts to train the very AI that will likely replace her by the end of the year. Welcome to the debate.
Glad to be here.
Today, we are asking the defining macroeconomic question of our era, right? As artificial intelligence fundamentally shifts the global economy away from labor-intensive models to AI-orchestrated ecosystems, does this technology act as an engine for massive economic exclusion, or does it create unprecedented new professional chances for the global workforce?
And just to establish our foundation, we are drawing directly on comprehensive source material analyzing the global deployment of AI.
Exactly. Everything from Fortune 500 automation protocols all the way down to the front lines of the gig economy. Our focus today centers entirely on analyzing this impact from the perspective of the affected workers.
Right.
So I represent the position that AI democratizes wealth creation and augments human potential, effectively shifting workers from selling basic wage labor to selling high-value intelligence.
And I represent the position that AI acts as an engine of profound structural exclusion. While the technology is remarkable, its real-world deployment is destroying traditional jobs, displacing millions of workers, and concentrating immense wealth into the hands of a few corporate monoliths.
Let's lay out our foundations by looking at what this actually means for the individual. From my perspective, we are witnessing what I call the AI augmented value thesis.
Okay, break that down.
Well, historically, the social contract of work was simple, right? Money flowed from hours worked. If you wanted to earn more capital, you had to sacrifice more time, an hour on a factory floor, a week at a desk.
Sure.
But AI flips this dynamic entirely, because output now definitively trumps input. The material provides this really striking data point from the World Bank's 2026 projections.
The 50% figure, right?
Exactly. 50% of global jobs can be augmented via AI copilots, resulting in an earnings boost of 15 to 30% for the workers utilizing them. What we are seeing is technology actually empowering individuals to scale their own capabilities.
But is it really scaling capabilities across the board?
I mean, take a freelance copywriter in the Philippines using a tool like Jasper.ai. They aren't being replaced by the software. They're using it to draft frameworks, generate variations, edit at scale. They are suddenly writing 10 times faster.
Right.
And consequently, they transition from charging by the hour to charging premium rates for AI-enhanced finished deliverables. The World Economic Forum projects 97 million new AI-related jobs will be created. We are moving from a paradigm of wage labor to one where the worker becomes an orchestrator of intelligent systems.
I come at it from a different way. I look at the exact same technological deployment, and honestly, I see a thesis of obsolescence.
Obsolescence.
Yes, you frame AI as a tool that sits in the worker's hand, like a better hammer. But automation, particularly in its current generative and agentic forms, is ruthlessly efficient at removing the human from the loop entirely.
I think that's a bit of an overstatement.
Well, you mentioned the World Economic Forum's 97 million new jobs, but we must also look at their parallel projection of 85 million displaced workers. And that displacement is not theoretical, right? It is happening at a massive scale right now.
Yes, disruption is happening.
Look at Teleperformance, that massive global customer service provider detailed in our material. Their 400,000 agents operating in hubs like the Philippines are already seeing 70% of their workload automated.
But wait, that automation handles the absolute most repetitive tasks. Password resets, basic account inquiries.
It goes far beyond that. They are using fine-tuned large language models. These aren't just generic chatbots. The company takes a baseline AI and trains it specifically on millions of hours of their own proprietary customer service transcripts.
Right, so it's highly specialized.
Exactly. The model learns the exact tone of the company, the specific troubleshooting trees, and it operates across 100 different languages instantly. It doesn't just answer questions. It queries the network, identifies an outage, and issues a prorated refund without a human ever seeing the ticket.
Wow.
So the new jobs that are theoretically being created to replace these stable traditional roles are either highly exclusive to elite, mathematically educated populations, the people building the models, or they are hyper-precarious gig work. The technology is phenomenal, but its application is systematically leaving the low-skill worker behind.
You mentioned the displacement of those agents, but let's look at what happens to the capital that used to pay for that massive centralized infrastructure.
It goes to the corporate bottom line.
No, it's shifting into the hands of the individual orchestrator. This brings us to the reality of these so-called new jobs. You frame it as exploitation, but I look at the individual creator and see unprecedented leverage.
Leverage for who, exactly?
Well, let's return to the Indonesian YouTuber detailed in our material. They use Midjourney, an image generation AI, to instantly create highly clickable thumbnails that would previously require a graphic designer.
Right.
And they use an AI called Grok to structure their script writing and analyze trending topics. Because the AI handles the heavy lifting of production, they are monetizing their channel 5 times faster than they could a few years ago.
Okay, but that's one person.
Or look at the Fiverr marketplace, where prompt engineers are successfully commanding $100 an hour. This is fundamentally different from traditional gig work. This is selling intelligence and direction as a service. Generative AI provides an infinite supply of text, code, and imagery, and the worker's new role is to direct that supply.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why.
Go ahead.
Highlighting a successful Indonesian YouTuber or a niche prompt engineer making $100 an hour is a textbook case of survivorship bias.
I don't think it's just survivorship bias.
It really is, though. It paints a highly optimistic picture based on the absolute peak outliers of the digital economy. If you're listening to this and you work in middle management or logistics or basic administration, you cannot simply pivot to becoming a viral content creator.
Obviously, not everyone becomes a YouTuber, but
Right. So if we want to look at the massive structural scale of new work generated by AI, we have to look at the data and annotation factories.
you're referring to platforms like Scale AI?
Exactly. These models are incredibly hungry. They require massive, perfectly organized data sets to learn how to identify a stop sign or, how to distinguish between a benign tumor and a malignant one in a medical scan.
Right, humans have to label that.
And platforms like Scale AI rely on a distributed global workforce to manually tag, correct, and align this data. We are talking about human beings sitting at screens for 8 hours a day, drawing bounding boxes around pedestrians and video frames for $20 an hour.
That's a valid concern.
This isn't the democratization of wealth. This is gig economy 2.0. It is highly precarious, it lacks healthcare benefits, it lacks long-term security, and frankly, it is highly repetitive digital piecework. We are replacing stable, centralized employment with a fragmented swarm of disposable task agents whose only job is to patch the holes in the AI's understanding until the AI no longer needs them.
But isn't focusing solely on the displaced call center workers akin to mourning the loss of switchboard operators while ignoring the entire telecommunications industry that followed?
I think that analogy masks the severity of the current situation.
If you only look at the immediate displacement, you miss the fact that the tractor created the entirely new, highly sophisticated field of agricultural logistics, agronomy, and global food supply chains. We have to look at the empirical reality of how these systems perform in the real world right now.
Okay, let's look at the real world.
The source material is clear that human-AI hybrid teams outperform pure AI by a factor of 2 times.
In specific cognitive tasks, yes.
But that proves a broader point. Symbiosis, not total replacement, is the actual end game of this technological shift. The AI handles the repetitive, data-heavy tasks, processing the spreadsheets, drafting the boilerplate code, executing the baseline medical scans.
Sure.
The human provides the strategic oversight, the empathy, and the contextual judgment that machines fundamentally lack. The transition is disruptive, undoubtedly, but it leads to a more highly leveraged, valuable workforce where human judgment is the premium product.
That symbiosis might exist for a software developer or a financial analyst, but we have to look at the global macroeconomic reality. The true wealth generated by this transition is not trickling down to the displaced worker. It is being captured by corporate behemoths.
Is it entirely captured, though?
Largely, yes. High-income nations are leading this charge, with the U.S. seeing a 25% AI-driven boost to its GDP, precisely while global low-skilled jobs vanish. Let's look at the actual mechanisms of wealth capture detailed in the text.
Okay.
You have JP Morgan's LockXM system executing 50% of equity trades autonomously. You have Amazon's AWS orchestrating 1.75 million orders daily. They use profit models, highly advanced time series forecasting tools to predict exact consumer demand. And then dynamic algorithms set the prices autonomously based on that demand.
Right.
McKinsey estimates these productivity gains at $4.4 trillion annually.
Which is a massive injection of value into the global economy.
But to put that in perspective, that $4.4 trillion isn't showing up in standard paychecks for the working class. It's showing up in stock buybacks, dividend payouts, and skyrocketing corporate valuations.
I mean, capital tends to consolidate initially, but
The efficiency is trapped at the very top. These are closed ecosystems of immense capital. When Amazon's algorithm optimizes a supply chain and saves $50 million a quarter, that money doesn't translate into higher wages for the warehouse worker. It translates into capital returns for the owners of the algorithm.
that's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently.
How so?
You are looking strictly at the massive institutional players, but the exact same underlying technology is aggressively crossing borders and lowering barriers to entry for smaller players. AI is fundamentally borderless.
Borderless in theory.
No, in practice, the material highlights small and medium enterprises in Vietnam that are utilizing affordable Azure AI to compete on a global scale. They are using cloud-based predictive analytics to optimize their own supply chains, something that used to cost millions in enterprise software.
Okay, but
We see Mexican artisans using AI-generated designs via platforms like Printful to scale their businesses globally without needing to manage physical inventory. Even more profoundly, look at Kenya, where M-Pesa AI microloans are yielding 25% returns for retail users.
how exactly are those microloans functioning for someone without a banking history?
That's the beauty of it. In Kenya, an M-Pesa user might not have a traditional credit score, but the AI looks at their mobile money transaction history, their utility payments, even the frequency of their phone top-ups, and builds a highly accurate risk profile in milliseconds.
Wow. Okay.
Right? This allows a street vendor to instantly secure a microloan to buy inventory for the day, yielding a massive return on their business that was entirely impossible under the old legacy banking system.
I see.
Or look at India's Aadhaar-linked AI apps that actually reward users financially for their data contributions. AI is not just a tool for Amazon and JP Morgan. It is democratizing access to financial tools, logistics, and global markets for workers and small business owners who were previously entirely locked out.
That assumes that the playing field is remotely level, which it isn't. Data is the absolute currency of this era. The systems you're talking about require massive, clean, structured data sets to function effectively.
True, data quality matters.
Why does this matter? Because AI models are hungry. If a small business has its sales data in one cloud software, its inventory in a filing cabinet, and its customer feedback in scattered emails, the AI can't connect the dots. The material explicitly notes that 60% of firms are plagued by these exact data silos.
Yeah, siloed data is an issue.
The only entities that can truly leverage this technology at scale are the giants with immense capital and fully integrated proprietary data pipelines.
But the APIs allow anyone to tap into those foundational models.
Managing $21 trillion globally, it can stress test massive investment portfolios against global events in seconds, because BlackRock owns the pristine historical data moat.
Right, their proprietary data is unmatched.
A small enterprise in Vietnam using a Microsoft Azure API is not competing with that. They're simply renting compute power from another tech monopoly. The working class is effectively locked out of structural ownership of the very models that dictate the new economy. Without ownership of the data or the compute, workers are just tenants in a digital landscape owned by a fraction of a percent of the population.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective.
Sure.
Even if we accept that large corporations own the foundational models, the way those corporations operate internally is fundamentally changing in a way that elevates the human worker. Let's look at the endpoint you're most concerned about, hyperautomation.
Yes, hyperautomation.
The material outlines how companies are currently automating 40% of their operations. General Electric's Predict system, for instance, uses predictive AI to save $1 billion in maintenance costs by predicting when an industrial turbine will fail before it actually breaks down.
Which is incredibly efficient.
Exactly. And as these companies automate the routine, physical, and basic cognitive tasks, they don't just fire everyone. They increasingly rely on workers to shift to high-level strategy, system governance, and AI ethics. The human oversight simply moves up the value chain.
But does it? Let's examine the actual trajectory of that hyperautomation. The material specifically describes the end game as factories that run themselves and precision without physicians in loops.
Okay, those are extreme edge cases.
Are they? We are looking at Tesla's gigafactories in Texas and Shanghai, producing millions of cars with AI vision systems directly guiding Optimus humanoid bots on the floor. We are looking at United Health's Optum AI processing 1 billion healthcare claims yearly, identifying and denying fraud at 99% accuracy without a single human intervention.
Right, in administrative tasks.
The goal of corporate hyperautomation is not to elevate the worker to a philosopher or a strategist. The explicit goal is to eliminate the labor cost entirely.
But those systems still require prompting, maintenance, and direction.
Not for long. With the rise of transformative AI, or TAI, we are seeing the deployment of truly agentic systems. For our listeners, TAI isn't just a chatbot where you type in a prompt and get a response. We are talking about AI that can act autonomously as a sophisticated project manager.
Right, it can execute multi-step workflows.
Exactly. You don't ask it to write an email. You give it a high-level goal, like maximize our quarterly profit margins in the European sector by 2%. The AI then independently decomposes that broad goal into subtasks. It queries logistics databases, negotiates pricing with freight APIs, reroutes shipping lanes, and executes contracts all entirely automatically. They are actively engineering the human out of the loop.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because it treats the workforce as a static, helpless entity incapable of adaptation.
I don't think workers are helpless, but the system is overwhelming.
Yes, the nature of the tasks is changing radically, perhaps faster than anything we've seen before. But the workforce is also actively reskilling. The material points out that workers can upscale in precisely the areas AI struggles with, like complex prompt engineering and AI ethics, through highly accessible platforms like free Coursera courses.
That is a lot to ask of a displaced worker.
Furthermore, society is already architecting the macroeconomic buffers for this transition. We have universal basic income pilots in Finland and India specifically designed to support workers as the economy transitions.
But how do we pay for that globally?
Here is the crucial mechanism. The sheer abundance created by AI, the massive deflationary pressure it puts on the cost of intelligence, healthcare, and services will ultimately fund these safety nets. A UBI becomes highly viable when the cost of living plummets.
Okay.
Ultimately, transformative AI won't just self-design corporate processes. It will enable personal AI economies. Imagine an individual whose personal AI agent can earn, invest, and negotiate micro-contracts for them while they sleep.
Relying on free Coursera courses is a remarkably fragile bridge to cross a chasm of 85 million displaced workers. You cannot simply take a 40-year-old assembly line worker or a rural call center agent and expect them to prompt engineer their way out of structural unemployment.
People are more adaptable than you're giving them credit for.
It's not about adaptability, it's about velocity. The absolute velocity of this scaling is what makes it so dangerous. It took decades for the agricultural workforce to transition to manufacturing.
True.
That timeline allowed for generational turnover, right? The farmer didn't necessarily have to become a machinist, their children did. Generative AI does not grant us that grace period. It scales its supply infinitely and instantly.
It is incredibly fast.
When Philips AI radiology models can suddenly read 10 million medical scans annually, or when Nomura's AI robo-advisors can serve 10 million individual clients via automated Monte Carlo simulations which run thousands of market scenarios in seconds to predict portfolio risk, the displacement of human analysts is immediate and borderless.
Right.
And as for universal basic income, a UBI might keep people fed, But standard of living isn't just about caloric intake. Work provides dignity, purpose, and the upward mobility that define the traditional economic ladder. A permanent UBI is the ultimate concession that the economy simply no longer needs the vast majority of human beings to function.
Well, we have covered a tremendous amount of ground here today, looking closely at the mechanisms of how AI is fundamentally rewiring wealth creation and the daily reality of the global worker.
It's a complex picture, for sure.
To summarize my position in light of our discussion, while this transition requires immense agility, societal support, and adaptation, AI is ultimately shifting the global economy to reward human creativity, strategy, and judgment over brute hours worked.
Right.
By augmenting human capabilities, drastically lowering the barriers to global commerce for small players, and allowing individuals to monetize their digital footprint, AI offers the worker a chance to build a highly leveraged personal economy rather than simply renting out their time.
And to summarize my perspective, the sheer velocity of AI scaling poses a severe and immediate threat of structural exclusion for the everyday worker. Driven by generative AI's infinite supply and a relentless corporate mandate for hyper-automation, we are watching the active displacement of millions of jobs. The staggering wealth generated by these incredibly powerful systems is being captured by the very few who control the compute power and the proprietary data moats, leaving the traditional worker highly vulnerable in a fragmented, precarious gig economy.
I think where we absolutely converge today, despite our different outlooks on the outcome, is the recognition that traditional wage labor, the simple equation of trading a discrete hour of your time for a discrete unit of capital as we've known it for a century, is definitively coming to an end.
I agree completely. Whether society addresses this massive displacement through intense global reskilling initiatives, structural implementations of universal basic income, or mandatory human-AI hybrid working models, a massive societal shift is not just a theoretical possibility. It is already underway and entirely inevitable.
We leave you to consider the reality of navigating this borderless AI arena, a space where profound technological abundance and the very real threat of deep economic scarcity coexist side by side. We highly encourage you to dive deeper into the source material, to strategize your own place in this rapidly evolving landscape. Think back to that automated factory floor or that predictive algorithm rewriting your industry. Whether that technology represents your inevitable replacement or the greatest power tool you will ever wield depends entirely on how we choose to navigate the loop. Thank you for joining us.